Hi everyone, and welcome to your next installment of Wine Unpacked. This month is maybe the most important lesson in the whole course, and it's definitely the one that will save you the most money over time. It's all about finding value, because who doesn't love a bargain? Not all of today's wines are cheap, but they all represent big bang for your buck. And along the way, we'll be learning some other nifty tricks that you can employ to get good value for money in shops or restaurants. We've got a 50-50 split with the reds and the whites this month, so make sure your white wines have been chilled. If you need, you can pop them in the freezer for 10 minutes now before you get going. We've got a mix of wine styles today, so no need for any specific snack pairings. Anything savoury, crisps, olives, nuts will all be great. So, how do we find value in wine? Just get the cheapest bottle, right? Well, maybe that sometimes works, but it's definitely not always the case. 2 for £5 wine is very unlikely to be any good. How about just picking the most expensive wine on the list? Well, that's not the case either, unfortunately. Value is about finding the sweet spot between price and quality, and you'll be pleased to know that you've already done the first value hunting trick. With the help of Wine Unpacked, you're learning what wine you do and don't like. This is the best way to get value, because if you know how to ask for the style of wine you like, the sommeliers and shop staff are happy to recommend things that are similar. There's absolutely no point in spending hundreds of pounds on a bottle of first growth Bordeaux if it's not something you like. Just because a bunch of old winos say that Bordeaux is the best wine, that doesn't mean you're going to like it. Not liking Bordeaux or Chateauneuf du Pape or any kind of wine is absolutely fine. We all have different tastes, and that's part of what makes wine fun. If you can start to understand which wines you do and don't like and which characteristics they have, this will help to give you tons of ammo next time you're having a chat with someone selling you wine. Are you into tannins or not? Do you like bold, spicy reds or delicate, fruity ones? Do you like the funky tang of low intervention natural wines or not? Remember, there are no right or wrong answers to this. It's all about what you like. And we want to make it as easy as possible to figure out what your tastes are. So on our website, on the lesson page each month, feedback on which wines you do and don't like, and we'll start to pull this together into a tasting profile for you. A breakdown of exactly what you do and don't like. A little bit of info, a couple of grapes and styles are all a wine expert needs to be able to start making better recommendations for you. So value tip number 1, get to know your own tastes and learn how to describe them. Now on to our first wine. Let's crack it open. Right, we are looking at a very pale lemon colour here, almost with a faint green tinge. Depending on how quickly you get around to opening this, there might be a few bubbles in there as well. Let's have a smell to figure out the intensity. Probably put this one in the medium category. Swirl it a bit to open it up. It's not crazy intense, but it's got a really nice bright freshness to it. What aromas are you picking out? I get lemon and grapefruit, bright citrus flavours, perhaps some fresh peach, a touch of grass too, and also a kind of wet stone aroma. Let's take a sip. So this wine should be lighting up your taste buds, nice and refreshing. I get that citrus flavour coming through, some lemon and grapefruit, and I can still taste the peach. It's delicious, but it's not the most complex wine. Let's hop over to structure and see what we can find there. Body-wise, what do you reckon? I think we're looking at light here. It's not thick or heavy, there's definitely a freshness to it. This wine style is quite low in alcohol, at around 11%, so this means the body is quite light too. Tannin, nothing to report here until we move on to the reds, and sweetness is definitely dry too. Acidity, we're looking at high. It's got a tingly, mouth-watering characteristic to it. Again, if you're drinking it quite soon after receiving your pack, there might still be a slight spritz to the wine. Not fizzy like champagne, but a slight effervescence. This is the style for how this particular wine is made, and that slight spritz, the low alcohol and light body come together with the high acidity to make a super refreshing wine. So what are we drinking and why is it good value? Well, this wine is called a Chacolí or Chacolina. It's from the Basque region of northern Spain, where the TX is pronounced as ch. You might have heard of the popular food destination San Sebastian, and the Basque region runs along this coast and actually over into France a little bit as well. These Chacolís are the region's speciality. They're fun, fresh, easy to drink, but most of all, good value. So why is that? Well, for a start, looking at conclusions, while they've got a good intensity, nice balance and finish, they're never hugely complex. They're not seen as incredibly serious wines, and therefore priced as such. They're meant to be fun, everyday wines to drink. They actually serve the wines by pouring them from a great height to make the bubbles even bigger. But they're also good value because the region and the wine is relatively unknown. Wine, like everything else in life, is subject to the swings of supply and demand. And because there's a finite limit on the area you can make good wine in any given region, supply is always limited to some extent. As regions get more popular, the demand goes up, and unless the region extends the boundaries of where the wine can be produced, usually the price does too. And when the quality of liquid in the bottle hasn't changed, that means worse value. Chacolí wines are still a little bit obscure, and so at the moment offer really great value because the demand hasn't driven up the price. If you're looking for a light, refreshing, easy drinking wine, perfect for a lunch on a hot day, similar to Picpoul or perhaps a Pinot Grigio, Chacolí is a great value alternative. That's not to say Pinot Grigios or Picpouls are overpriced, but you're likely to be getting better value from these lesser known Chacolí wines. Plus, you'll be drinking something a bit more unusual and exploring less common regions. All along this north coast of Spain and Portugal, there are a few light, refreshing white wine options that fit a similar profile to this and also offer good value. On the northwest tip of Spain, where it borders Portugal, you have the Spanish region of Rias Baixas and the Portuguese region of Vinho Verde. Both of these areas make wines from the Albarino or Alvarinho grape, depending on which side of the border you're on. Again, these are usually young, fresh, acidic wines, and they sometimes have a light spritz too. So, what would you drink this style of wine with? Well, it's acidic and light-bodied, which actually makes it a great match with a lot of foods. But the Basque Country is home to some of the most incredible food in the world. Their version of tapas is called pinchos, and being next to the sea, they have a ton of great seafood. There's one pincho dish called a gilda, a perfect little mouthful on a cocktail stick with an anchovy for salt and umami, an olive for more salt and bitter fruitiness, and a pickled guandilla chili for acid and spice. You're meant to have only one or two, but could easily work your way through a whole plate of these with a bottle of Chacolí. If you're looking for something a bit more substantial, this area is famous for grilled turbot, but any grilled white fish would be great with this too. So that's Chacolí, a zippy, refreshing wine to go perfectly with food and help you get good value. This one is from an organic producer based near Guetaria, an area especially famous for turbot. You're probably looking at £14 or £15 in a shop for this, and maybe £30 to £35 in a restaurant. It's a great choice if you're looking for a white that most people will enjoy, and unlike Pinot Grigio, you're unlikely to hear any groans from the rest of the table when you order it. Either finish your glass or pop the last sip back into your bottle if you want to compare later on. And we're going to head from northern Spain over to Hungary to find another style of wine that's still relatively unknown. So pour wine number 2 into your glasses and let's find out what that is. Okay, so what do we have here? Again, we're looking at pale yellow. Give it a sniff and let's see what kind of intensity we've got going on. So we're probably medium here. Let's give it a swirl and see what aromas there are. So okay, quite a lot going on here. A bit more than the last, so let's start on the first wheel. I get lemon again, like the first wine, but also a rich apple aroma too. Peach, maybe something floral, some kind of blossom. There's a decent concentration of scents from the first wheel here. Let's hop over to the next wheel because I'm also picking out some other aromas from there. I get a bread or dough aroma coming through. This wine's been through a process where it's been aged on the lees, which are the dead yeast cells. This can make the wine smell a little bit like bread. I also get a few aromas from the last wheel. This wine's only a couple of years old, but it's already starting to develop some interesting characteristics. I get fresh almonds or honey or perhaps some beeswax. There's sort of like a woody, resiny undertone to it all. Let's take a sip and see what else is going on with this wine. Okay, so a lot of those aromas are coming through. I'm getting that fruity, floral up front, but definitely some of those more interesting bread, nut, wax flavors too. Body-wise, I'd go with medium to full. It's been aged on the lees, which helps add to the body and has a decent level of alcohol too. No tannin again, and we're definitely dry here. Finally, onto acidity, and with this I'd say we're sitting medium to high. Not quite as fresh and zippy as the last, but it's definitely got a refreshing streak to it. This wine is made from a grape called Furment in northeast Hungary. It's one of the grapes they use to make the famous dessert wine Tokaj, and the grape has really thick skins. These add to the body, and because it's usually used to make dessert wine, it also accumulates lots of sugar as it ripens. Because this wine is dry, however, all that sugar is converted into alcohol, meaning they're quite boozy. This one is 13.5%. Lastly, because dessert wines need the sweetness to be balanced, they tend to have a high level of acidity. Furment has this too, which is where the refreshing acidity comes from in this wine. Sweet Tokajs have been famous for hundreds of years, but now dry ferment is increasing in popularity too. It's not a hard and fast rule, but picking a less popular wine or grape from a popular region can often result in really good value. The region will often have the infrastructure, winemaking knowledge, soil and climate. It's just lacking that demand for certain styles. So these wines can often be a great shout and are interesting to explore too. Because of the higher alcohol, decent body and acidity, Furment can be great with food. I'd maybe order this instead of a unoaked Chardonnay, and pairings-wise, it'd actually be really versatile. It's not so heavy, but you could still have it with seafood and vegetarian dishes, but you could definitely pair it with some poultry, or even some lighter meat dishes like pork. Chicken paprikash is a famous Hungarian dish. A creamy chicken stew flavoured with sour cream and paprika, and I reckon it would go perfectly with that. There's enough intensity to stand up to stronger flavours like paprika, but a good acidity to cut through the rich fat of the cream and chicken too. For a veggie option, you can make the same dish with mushrooms instead. What do you think conclusions-wise with this wine? I get a decent intensity. There's definitely some complexity, with a few flavours coming through from each wheel, and these complex resin and nut aromas. There's nothing wrong with the balance, and the finish is pretty strong too. I think this is a really good wine, and for the price, I think it's even better. This wine is from a producer called Het Solo. This is one of the producers who make a good sweet Tokaj, but their dry wines are becoming more and more popular as well. This one is organic too. It's another really good value wine in my opinion. It's around £16 to £17 in a shop. You'll probably be paying a little bit more than £40 in a restaurant. In restaurants, there's always going to be a much bigger markup than wines you'll find in a shop. It's just a fact of life that the overheads are bigger and they need to charge more. This leads us on to a restaurant-related value lesson, and that is that the sommelier and serving staff are your friend. And figuring out how to ask the right questions will help you get much better value, as well as learning what you like. Learn how to describe it. If you know what you do and don't like, knowing what you're going to eat and have a price range, they'll usually be able to make some really good suggestions. You'll know how many bottles fall within your preferred price range, and if their suggestions are too high, just be honest with them. Even if you're not confident in which grape, region or style to choose, you can at least be confident in what you like and what you can afford. So that's Furment, an up-and-coming dry white grape from Hungary, but can get you real good value at a restaurant with some pretty weighty wines that don't cost the earth. It's probably about time for our next wine, so let's save a little bit of wine number 2 and pop wine number 3 into our glasses to find a bit more about it. Okie dokie, so it looks like we are sticking with pale lemon for the next one. No deviation from the colour, the same as a lot of white wines. It's definitely picking up a little bit more in the intensity department. Sort of really powerful aroma. And some really interesting flavours going on here too. Is there anything you can pick up from the first wheel? Perhaps you can detect some bruised yellow apple aromas. I think I got some pear as well, and a touch of citrus. Maybe some floral aromas like apple blossom. And a bit of a whetstone mineral action going on too. Hop onto the second wheel as you might be able to smell some buttery creaminess. This is from the winemaking. Malolactic fermentation is where the harsh malic acid, the acid you get from apples, is fermented into soft lactic acid, the kind you get in butter and cream. It's also been aged in contact with the yeast lees like the last wine, so if you can detect baked bread, that's where that's coming from. There's also a very faint touch of vanilla. This wine was made using oak barrels, but it's only very subtle. They were large, old barrels, which gives less flavour as less of the wine is in contact with the oak. Finally, let's move on to the last wheel, because even though this wine is from 2020 and therefore not massively old, the barrel aging process it's gone through means that you might pick up a little bit of honey and a little bit of hazelnut. A lot of different aromas. Definitely no shortage of complexity here. Is there anything else you can pick out? Next up, what about the characteristics? So I can definitely taste a few of the things we picked out in aromas. And on body, I think we're probably looking somewhere between medium and full. The lees aging and the barrel aging are helping to give the wine a really luxurious texture. And it's from sunny South Africa, so the warm climate helps to increase the sugar levels in the grapes, meaning more alcohol in the finished wine, again adding to the body. There's no tannin, but it's dry, and acidity-wise, I think it's really decent again. The main grape used here is typically high in acidity, and despite the warm climate, the acidity has remained high. This is definitely a wine that you could enjoy on its own, but it's also one that would pair wonderfully with food. Rotisserie chicken would be great, or even lighter meats like lamb. Hard cheeses, perhaps an aged Gruyere or Comté would work. Nothing too stinky, but something with a bit of nuttiness to go with those complex hazelnut aromas. Despite being a little bit more pricey than the first two, it's still only £22 a bottle. And for that price, I think this is an absolute steal. I think that you can really taste that this is a really high quality wine, which conveniently brings us onto our next value tip. And that, perhaps counterintuitively, is that if you spend more money, you actually often get better value. A quick economics lesson for you, but don't worry, we'll try our best to not put you to sleep. When you break down the price of a bottle of wine, some of what makes up the costs are fixed costs and some are variable. VAT, for example, is variable as it's 20% of the overall selling price. That price goes up and the VAT goes up too, or in other words, it varies. Wine duty or import tax, on the other hand, is fixed. Regardless of the selling price, it's taxed at £2.23 per bottle. Things like the price of the wine bottle and the price of the label and the cork are relatively consistent regards of selling price too. This all means that if you take a £5, £10 or £20 bottle of wine, the amount of money available left to spend on a wine varies dramatically. With a £5 bottle, you're looking at around 30 pence value of actual liquid wine in each bottle. Spend £20 and you're looking at about £7 worth of wine. So 23 times more money goes into the wine with only a 4 times increase in price. There are some exceptions to this rule, and we're not saying that you can't get okay wines at the £5 mark, but if you're looking for a way to upgrade your drinking experience, moving away from the sub £10 wines can be a really good way to do that, and you should hopefully notice a difference as you move up and up in price. Remember, there's an upper limit to it, and wine doesn't get exponentially better. While a £200 bottle will likely taste great, it's definitely not going to taste 10 times better than a £20 bottle. Talking about £5 bargain wines, let's talk a little bit about these grapes. This wine is actually a blend of a few grapes, but the main one we've got in the mix is Chenin Blanc. It's about 3/4 Chenin. Chenin is a really versatile grape. It can make sweet dessert wines, off-dry wines, and even sparkling wines, all of which the Loire Valley in France is very famous for. It can make really rich, full-bodied, complex, flavorful wines that stand up to aging, just like this one. But it can also make light, easy drinking wines with fresh apple aromas at reasonable price points. This wine here is from the Mullineux vineyards in South Africa. It's not strictly organic, but the grapes are grown and the wine here is made with as little chemical intervention and preservatives as possible. There are tons of other incredible Chenins from South Africa, and they can be fab value. This is one of the more premium examples, but one of my favourite go-tos is a $4.99 Chenin from Aldi. Supermarkets can be a great place to find value. Aldi wines are especially good, and wine websites like Decanter will do a rundown of supermarket selections each season to highlight particularly good ones. Sainsbury's Taste the Difference range is also usually great, as is the new M&S Found range, that features lots of good value, lesser-known grapes. Supermarkets have a lot of buying power. About half of all wine money is spent in supermarkets. This means that while there's still only 30 pence worth of wine in a £5 bottle, they've managed to buy higher quality wine with their 30 pence. It'll still be better to spend slightly more, as the same rules apply and you'll be getting more for your money. Remember though that UK supermarkets are buying close to 1 billion bottles of wine a year, and so that comes with many other compromises. Most of the wines they sell will be mass-produced, and for some people who prefer the idea of smaller-scale boutique wineries, that enormous scale in itself might make supermarkets seem like bad value. Lastly, one final thing to remember about supermarkets is to be careful with the special offers. They're there and they're in red because they know that people are drawn to them like moths. It can be a little bit sneaky though, and they don't always offer good value. A lot of the time, they're used to draw people in to wines that weren't selling at their original price points, and they can sometimes be even sneakier than that. If a wine tastes good and you think you've got a bargain, no worries, but don't use it as a rule for getting good value. Okay, so that wraps up our white wines. Let's do a quick recap of the wines and value tips and tricks before we move on to our reds. First, we learned that knowing what you do and don't like is the best way to get better value. We drank Chacolí and found that this lesser-known wine and the northern Spanish coast can be an ideal place to find great value, light, zippy white wines with a little spritz. Then we moved on to the dry ferment from Hungary. With both this and the last, we found that lesser-known grapes and regions where demand is lower can often lead to bargains. Dry ferments are often full-bodied with really great acidity and can have some really complex aromas and flavours too. We talked about how you can get the most out of sommeliers and then moved on to our last wine, the Chenin, a really rich, complex wine with plenty going on in the complexity department. Here we found out that spending a little bit more can give you better value, but if you're looking to spend less, the supermarket-owned brand ranges can be a great place to look, although be wary of special offers. Pause here for a sec to finish off your whites before we move on to the red wines today. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got here. Definitely a pale ruby colour. I'm getting a really good intensity here too. A little bit of that natural wine funk. I can smell a lot of red fruit and some black fruit too. I get some black currant and blackberry. And a really rich cherry aroma, almost like cherry drop sweets with a bit of sharp cranberry in there too. I'm getting a bit of that sourdough pastry aroma, and coupled with the red fruit, it's making me think of cherry Bakewell tart. Delicious. Faint touch of spice and a touch of smoke too. Let's take a sip. I can taste a lot of bright fruit, There's a nice berry flavour to the wine, and that cherry is coming through too. Going through the characteristics, I'd say that we're probably light to medium for body and for tannin. It feels like the wine has been made in a fresh, lighter style. It's definitely dry, but we've got decent acidity here, helping the wine to keep more freshness on top of those bright berry aromas and flavours. I think moving on to our conclusions, it's got a nice intensity, it's well balanced with just enough tannin, but nothing too overpowering. Complexity is okay, but then nothing unusual or deep going on. So what have we got in our glasses? Well, this wine is made from a grape called Blaufränkisch, which is a lesser known grape that's mainly planted in Austria. It's another good example of where lesser known grapes and regions can give us good value. Flavour profile wise, it's a great alternative to Pinot Noir with high levels of acidity, low to medium tannins, and bright berry fruit flavours. Because Pinot Noir is so difficult and picky to grow, yields can be relatively low, so it can get really expensive. Grapes like Blaufränkisch can be a great shout if you're looking for something similar to Pinot in a restaurant, but don't want to fork out for a premium grape. Here we're looking at about £15 a bottle again, so you would expect to pay around £40 in a restaurant. Of course, you can't guarantee that a wine list is going to have Blaufränkisch on the menu. Learning what you do and don't like is one of the best ways to find value, but learning a vocabulary to describe what you're going for so you can ask a sommelier, or figuring out a quick way to research is also a good idea. Whether you're looking at a wine list in a restaurant or scouring a shop looking for something to take to a dinner party, looking online is a quick and easy way to get more info. For example, a quick Google for Blaufränkisch characteristics would help give you an idea of the tannin, body, and acidity. Or if you've already got your eye on a particular dish, searches for what wine pairs with it can throw up a couple of good suggestions. This wine would go really well with confit duck and a fruit sauce, or perhaps a rack of lamb or a tomato-based pasta dish too. And a quick bit of research or a conversation with your friendly sommelier can help you find great pairings like that. Although sometimes it's fun to throw caution to the wind and just try it. The more you drink, the more you learn. This wine in particular is from Franz Weniger, another organic producer in the Burgenland area of Austria. Despite Austria having a long wine history, dating back to pre-Roman times, many of its wines have flown under the radar until relatively recently. But it's a great area to explore if you can take a bit of time to research their grapes. As far as white grapes go, things are relatively similar to Germany, with the addition of a local speciality, Grüne Veltliner. Red grape-wise, as well as Pinot Noir, they have a couple of other local specialities that are also really popular. We've got this grape Blaufränkisch and Saint Laurent, and finally Zweigelt, which is a cross between the two. They're all medium-bodied with relatively low tannins and decent acidity, which makes them all great with lighter meats like duck, lamb, or perhaps a traditional Austrian Wiener Schnitzel. Many of these dishes are often served alongside something fruity, like schnitzel with a side of cranberry sauce. These high-acid, light fruity wines are great with these kinds of food, but they make a good match for loads of other dishes, so it can be a great choice if you're looking for something to pair with a full meal. And buying a full bottle will usually be much better value than buying by the glass. Although buying by the glass is a great way to try lots and learn, so we'll leave that up to you. Okay, time to move on again to our next wine. So pop any remainders back in the bottle and we'll get started. Okay, colour-wise, I think we're much darker than the last one. And I'd say we're somewhere between ruby and purple. It's got a decent intensity on the nose, somewhere just north of medium. We'll give it a swirl and see what we can pick out. It's different from the last. It's got fewer of the sharp berry aromas and a bit more of a soft richness to it. I'd say that I'm picking out mainly black fruit. It's got blackberry, a bit of blackcurrant, some bright black plum, and a touch of black cherry too. There's a bit of red fruit, maybe some raspberry and cherry, giving the wine a bit of a lift. There's something a touch mineral to it, perhaps like crushed gravel or graphite. But other than that, I'd say the nose is relatively uncomplicated. Let's have a taste. Okay, so I'm picking out that black fruit. It's a relatively intense flavour, but it's definitely not too complex. It tastes like red wine to me. Again, uncomplicated. Structure-wise, we're looking at full in the body department. This wine's actually 14.5%, so it's giving a really big body. Tannins aren't enormous, but somewhere between medium and high. There are definitely some in there, and more so than the last, but nothing too bitter or astringent. No sweetness to speak of again, and acidity definitely isn't off the charts. Probably a medium. The wine is fuller than the last, richer with a bit more power. So what is it, and why is it good value? Well, this wine is from Languedoc in southwest France, and this one in particular is made from a blend of Syrah, Grenache and Carignan grapes in the sub-appellation of Corbières by the producer Domaine Oleo-Romanus. Syrah gives the purple tinge and the black fruit flavour as well as tannin. Grenache adds to the body and gives a bit of a lift with the red fruit, and Carignan adding a little bit of extra tannin and some additional complexity. Languedoc in the southwest of France is actually a great area to find value. Its focus is mainly on red wines. The climate is warm and they grow a wide range of red and black grapes, making both single varietal and blended wines. The region was actually where the first grapes were planted by the Romans, and the quality of the wines from the area was very high up until the 1800s. Back in those days, as the country was industrializing, people needed large quantities of wine. The population was growing and the water wasn't really safe to drink. Importing wines from South America, South Africa, Australia and New Zealand wasn't an option then, and so the warmest climate in France was for Languedoc. More and more vineyards began to be planted on the fertile valley floors instead of the premium hillside sites, leading to more high-volume, mass-market wines. This sullied the reputations of the remaining premium producers a bit, and with the exception of a couple of small premium areas, Languedoc wines began to become considered as quite low quality. This was fine when the masses were drinking lots of wine, but as water got safer and population growth slowed, wine consumption started to drop. Suddenly there was a lot of excess wine, and much of it was essentially poured down the drain. This went on for years, until it was decided it was time to pull up their lower quality vines. Quality started to be encouraged again, and now Languedoc is increasingly a great place to find decent wines at decent price points. The land is still relatively cheap, which means that the wine too is giving us great value. They still make generic wines called Vin de France, and also wines that are a slight step up, Vin de Pays d'Oc, still everyday drinking wines. But the overall quality is increasing, and in addition to the higher quality appellations such as Corbières, where this wine is from, Fittu and Minevois, there are lots of exciting areas to explore in the region. It's important to do a little bit of research here, as some of the wines can be a little bit rustic. But if you pay a little over £10, which is what you've got here, you can get a really decent crowd pleaser. I'd happily drink this at a dinner or a barbecue, and most other red wine drinkers would too. It's not going to win any medals for complexity, but it's a decent wine, and for £11.50 in the shops or around £30 in a restaurant, you could do a lot worse. It would work with quite a lot of different food. It's bold enough to go with heavier meat dishes like steaks or beef stews, but it's also not so high in tannin or overpowering that it wouldn't work with something a little lighter. It would work with a tomato-based pasta sauce, Middle Eastern dishes too. The Syrah in the blend goes well with Middle Eastern food. Like we said, a good all-rounder and a great alternative if you're looking for a better value alternative to something like a Côte de Rhône wine, or it's a style that could work for fans of heavier Cabernet-led wines. Pretty versatile. So that's our fifth wine. What do you think? It's time to move on to our final wine for today and find out the last of our value tips. So let's pour out wine number 6. Okay, our final wine for today. And looking at the colour, it's a little bit more unusual than the last two. It's got a pale intensity with a little bit of brown to it. Not as much as tawny, but it's definitely on its way there. Something we'd expect from an aged wine. Intensity-wise, this is definitely not pale. I would call it pronounced. There's a lot going on in here, I think. What can you pick out? I get some strawberries up front, maybe stewed strawberry and a bit of cherry and raspberry. There's some black fruit in here too. But then it starts to get a little bit unusual. I don't know about you, but I can pick out some olive, perhaps some tomato leaf or sun-dried tomato. There's a touch of something floral, maybe violet. Now, despite the brown tinges in the colour, this wine isn't actually aged. It's only a couple of years old, but it's already starting to show a couple of aromas from the third wheel. I get a little truffle or mushroom, perhaps something a little bit astringent or chemically like tar. There's quite a lot of interesting complex aromas. This wine has spent about 12 months aging in a barrel. And so if you detect a touch of smoke and spice from the second wheel, that's where that's coming from. Now, let's have a taste. Wow. So again, despite the colour, it's definitely not light. There's a great intensity of flavour here. I can pick out some of these weird aromas as flavours. What do you think in terms of body? It's not light, but I don't think we could go with heavy either. Perhaps let's say medium. Tannins are definitely there. They're probably medium to high, and they've got a slight powderiness to them. If you rub your tongue between your teeth and inner lip, you should see what I mean. It's not mega acidic, but it's quite high. Probably still putting this one in the high bucket. I think this one for me is a great wine. Conclusion-wise, it's got intensity, complexity, balance, and finish. It's a really fantastic wine quality-wise, but it's also got a few unusual flavours going on, so it might not be to everyone's tastes. What do you reckon? This grape is another unusual one, but it's becoming more and more popular. And despite the region being one of the oldest wine-producing countries in the world, it's still relatively obscure as far as modern wines are concerned. The grape is called Xinomavro, and it's typical of northern Greece in the region of Naousa. This one is from a natural and organic producer called Dalamara Winery, and it's a really cracking example of this kind of wine. Greece has a few different wine-producing areas, and this one, Naousa, is on the border of Macedonia in the hills of the north where it's a little bit cooler. There's a couple of things going on with Greek wine at the moment, the first of which was the recession triggered by the global financial crisis in 2008. While the whole country was massively impacted by this, one of the areas that tends to suffer during hard times is that people cut back, scale back, or downgrade on luxury items, e.g. eating out and wine. Up until 10 years ago, most Greek wine has been consumed in the country. But as premium wine sales slowed, they needed to find other markets and increase efforts to export wines into countries like the UK. The second thing that's happening is that Greek wine is getting really, really great. The quality is improving every year. There's a generation of young hotshot winemakers who have travelled the world, studied in the best winemaking schools, and working in prestigious wineries, and are now bringing the techniques they learned back home. One of the best results is what we've got here, Xinomavro. And despite the tricky pronunciation of the name, it's actually becoming increasingly common in restaurants. It's not everywhere yet, but you don't have to look too far to find it either. Despite the light colour, it's got a ton of tannin and flavour. People often compare it to the grape Nebbiolo, which has similar characteristics and is used to make the ultra-premium Italian wine Barolo. The difference between the two, though, is if you spend £25 on Xinomavro in a shop, you're going to get the absolute best one. Whereas if you spend £25 on Barolo, it's really the starting point, and to get anything good, you'll probably have to spend at least 40 quid. That makes Xinomavro a really good pick if you're looking to spend a little bit more than you might usually, but still get great value for money with an intensely powerful wine. Talking of premium wines like Barolos, that brings us nicely to our final lesson on finding value. There are certain regions that are famous around the world for making great wines, and for good reason. But that doesn't mean all the wines from that area are incredible. The prestigious region name can inflate the price of all wines from that region, while quality can still be mixed. In the same way that lesser-known regions can be great value, popular wine regions can be really bad value. Remembering the 1 million+ different bottles of wine available is an impossible task. So while knowing the grape, the style, and region can get you in the right ballpark, having a look at each specific wine can help to tell you if it's good value. Apps and websites like Vivino and Wine Searcher can help with this, And looking at a critic's score can be hugely helpful too. Finally, if you're looking to drink a famous or prestigious wine but you've not tried before, it's often better to save that for home. With the markups in restaurants being higher than in shops, you'll get better value this way, and you'll get to try a better example so you can see what all the fuss is about. Take the £40 Barolo, for example. In a restaurant, you'll be paying upwards of £100 for this. So maybe save restaurants for experimenting with new things like Cinot Mavros, or you've got your mate the sommelier there to help you out and make some good recommendations. Because of the tannins in this wine, you could pair it with something rich and hearty like a lamb or rabbit stew, but salt can help make tannins less astringent, so as long as you pair it with something relatively salty, you'll be okay with lighter dishes too. It's got a load of complex earthy flavours going on, so it could work with a wild mushroom risotto with plenty of parmesan. Okay, so a lot of information about value there, and a few interesting and hopefully delicious wines for you to try. Let's take a whiz through the wines and the key facts to remember. Once you're done, head over to the lesson page and tell us which wines you did and didn't like from this box, so we can add this information into your personal taste profile. Remember though, there are no wrong answers, but it's good to start to understand your own tastes. First off, we started with the white wines. We had the light, zippy Chacolí from northern Spain, followed by the slightly fuller-bodied Furmint from Tokai in Hungary, and then finally the more complex, nutty, buttery Chenin Blanc from South Africa. We learned that knowing your own taste preference is the most important thing in order to find good value. No point ordering the fanciest wine on the menu if you're not going to enjoy it. We found out that heading for unusual areas, grapes, and regions that make wines in the style that you like can also be a much better shout than going for the most famous areas where you're likely to pay a premium. If you do want to head over to a famous region, however, picking a less popular wine or grape is often a good shout to get good value. Counterintuitively, we talked about how spending more money can actually lead to better value because of fixed costs in wine production, and that £5 bottles of wine can be a little bit of a false economy. If you want to get good value at that price point, however, supermarkets are your best bet, although be wary of using special offers to decide what you choose. After that, we moved on to our red wines. We drank a bright, light, juicy, low tannin Blaufränkisch, again from a lesser known wine producing region, where we discussed how important researching wines is. Our next wine was the slightly more powerful medium to full bodied, red and dark fruit and medium tannin Languedoc from Corbière. If you like French wine but don't want to shell out loads of cash, Languedoc is a great region to try and can get value from what can be a very expensive country. And finally, we moved on to our last wine, the Greek Cinot Mavro. Again, Greece can be a great place to find value, and this grape is an especially excellent alternative to the much pricier Italian Barolo. Our final lesson was that if you want to push the boat out and try expensive wine, maybe save it for home rather than when you're in a restaurant to avoid paying the markup. It might be that you don't like it at all, so best not to pay a premium to find out. And that's it for today. We hope that's been useful and you've got a lot of value out of the lesson. The wines, grapes, and regions we covered today are just a couple of examples of where you can find great value on a wine list or in a shop. There are too many to count, but a bit of research and a chat with the staff in shops and restaurants can help you to find out more. The Spanish grape Mencía is increasingly popular for cheap, good value reds that punch above their weights. German wine can be very expensive, but it's also really underpriced compared to how much it should cost. Many of the Eastern European countries that have been making wine for years are getting better and better at it every day. And while Chile used to be seen as a more volume producer, it's increasingly making more and more high-quality wines at reasonable price points. Remember to check out the lesson page on our website and tell us what you liked. And as always, show us your tasting setups on social media. We love to know what you're up to, and we'll see you next time for more tips and tricks to help you get your head around the world of wine. Bye!